Well, so welcome everybody. Very exciting and important night. My name's Tom Grassi. I'm a design director at HNTB and co-chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, who's put together this event. And a quick committee plug, we meet the fourth Thursday of every month. I think we have a great committee. We've got events, guest speakers, keep up on industry trends, and arrange a lot of programming, events much like tonight. And my co-chair is Russell Kriegel here, and you'll see a bit more of our committee leadership very shortly. But thanks very much for attending, and talk to you later.
Okay, very quickly. I'm Russell Kriegel. I'm the co-chair of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, chief architect of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Wanted to say that, this represents, the Design Excellence Awards program really represents our passion about the importance of transportation and infrastructure projects. So, and I'm very proud of being a member of this committee, although I wasn't the lead when it happened, but I think they had a huge foresight in making this awards program. And we're happy to celebrate some prior winners and get ready to celebrate the next year's awards and the next winner. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy the speakers and the show. Aman?
Thank you. All right, so this is our committee, and we welcome anybody who wants to get involved. Tom said we meet every Thursday. It's an exciting run of programming events. I'm Aman Krishan. I run the Design Excellence Awards program for the committee, but I'm, in my day life, the design principal for HOK. I'm passionate about civic architecture. Transportation absolutely falls into that. So we run the awards program, and it's a biennial event. The last series was 2024. The next one is coming up in 2026. So mark your calendars, January 2026, we're going to open the awards. Now, this is really important for us, for the committee to get the word out there about the awards, because at the national AIA level, there is no recognition or separate recognition for transportation and infrastructure projects. And we believe very firmly that they shape the civic realm, and they need to be recognized as such for that. So the AIA chapter runs this awards program. It is open for all architects practicing nationally anywhere in the United States. Whether your project is in the United States or it's international, as long as you're practicing in the United States, you are eligible to submit for this program. The 2026 awards program, as you can see, we are actually running it in partnership with other AIA chapters and ASLA chapters nationwide: Austin, Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, including ASLA New York as well. So we're hoping that we're going to get some really good participation across the board here. In the program is broken into 5 categories, the awards. There's an awards for structures, for planning, open space, projects, and a student category. These are our awards winners from 2024, and you can see there's a very vast range of projects, very large scale that they cover, from the Moynihan Connector, which is a 600-foot long elevated walkway that connects the High Line to Moynihan Train Hall. Sunset Park, a planning study aimed to outline a comprehensive plan that leverages the existing assets to benefit local community and question how investments in infrastructure, planning, and urban design can contribute to growth in the neighborhood. Bronx River Greenway transforms a 25-acre brownfield in a historically marginalized area into a resilient public amenity. East River Midtown Greenway is an in-water structure that will provide public access to the waterfront along 7 blocks of east side of Manhattan. East New York Waterfront Park creates a public destination on the banks of the Passaic River for East New York community, grounded in social uplift, environmental justice, and ecological restoration. Prospect Trace transforms a dangerous and polluted utilitarian corridor into a civic space welcoming people, plants, and vehicles. And Conflux, the student project, addresses the multi-layered and complex urban issues that were related to, raised, and escalated from CBE, paralleled with the Bronx River historic degradation. Today, however, we're going to hear from two of our award winners from 2024, from Brooklyn Yards by Studio V and Kempegowda by SOM. And I'd like to hand it over to Margaret Newman, FAIA, who's a practice leader for urban places and smart mobility at Stantec, an architect and urban planner. Margaret focuses on projects that prioritize people to better integrate transportation options into the fabric and context of cities. She served as Chief of Staff for New York City Department of Transportation, directing major projects, including the construction for Times Square. So Margaret, over to you.
Thank you, Aman. And this is a nice, intimate group, so think of your questions while we're chatting. I'm really excited to do this panel, to moderate the discussion tonight. I was a very active member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and this is inspiring me I should return. I keep getting dragged into other things in the evening. But and John Schuyler and Rob Eisenstadt, I want to sort of give a shout out. That was a kind of brainchild of people who were on that committee at that time, and I think it's a really long overdue recognition. So we're going to hear about a couple of projects, as Aman mentioned, and I'd like to first of all welcome two panelists who probably many of you know. Laura Edelman, who is the managing partner and member of the executive committee at SOM. I'm going to let her talk about all her achievements. I think I wanted to specifically mention that she does do, we were chatting before we got started here about the kind of work that she's doing, which is not the normal fare for many architects, and they're technically complex projects, and an interest that she developed as a young child. So maybe you can talk about the inspiration for that. She is a longtime leader of the SOM Women's Initiative, committed to training the next generation of women architects, which I firmly support. And Jay Valgora, Jay and I have known each other for many years, going back, I guess, to my DOT days, probably. He will talk about his Brooklyn Yards project. I'll let him talk about his practice. I think just a quote that I thought was really wonderful from his bio, which is on the description here, which is bringing new life to the edges and interstices of our city while reconnecting communities. So I think the reconnecting communities is a key part of something we'll talk about as part of the transportation infrastructure discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. Let's see what the, don't forget to sign up for your learning units, which we all need. It's getting to the end of the year. Okay. Did I have to read those? No. Okay, good. All right. All right, Laura, if you'd like to go through your project. Sorry. Hi. Can you hear me without a microphone? Or do I want it? Yes? No.
You want to come up?
You need it. Come up here and you can use that.
It's also remote, I think, too.
Okay.
Oh.
We have people online? Nice. Okay. All right. So, well, we're all here live. Very happy to be here, Laura Edelman. And as Margaret said, I have long had a tremendous amount of interest in transportation projects from the start of my work at airports almost 30 years ago. But also, I shared with Margaret that my father, as a child, took me to Dulles Airport when you could go on one of the moving hold rooms before without even having a ticket, and taught me that Eero Saarinen was an amazing architect. And so I think there's been airports in the back of my mind for many, many years. And there's many kinds of transportation. I'm going to talk today about a very unique project that I was fortunate enough to lead in India. We've been doing a lot of work in India. We started with a different airport project, the main Mumbai airport project, almost 18 years ago. And in 2012, we won this competition. Superstorm Sandy was happening, and it all got delayed. And in 2015, we started work. And, you know, there are many themes that go with this program, and one of the key things, I think, is networks. And airports are really a network of not only places within their own areas, but connected networks where people are connecting by flight. And so this was a very fortunate project for us where we were building Terminal 2. We also had the opportunity to design the multimodal center, and we're like really expanding an airport project. This project was built in 2 phases. We designed the entire thing at the beginning. We did concept design. We all are familiar with that, for the whole thing so that we knew what everything was, but then really took detail all the way through detailed design through about 70% contract documents for phase 1, and helped with the reviews. And the interesting thing is that we think about transportation projects in how many millions of annual passengers see these buildings and visit these buildings. So the original Terminal 1 that you see here where it says Terminal 1 Apron was built for about 25 million, and phase 1 and 2 together will serve about 45 to 50 million. Phase 1 has been operational for almost 2 years, and we've recently done some replanning for them to begin phase 2. One of the interesting things for us was really thinking about the optimization of the place, but also about the theme about nature and sustainability, and really what is the essence of Bangalore, which is the place where this airport is. And so we began with a super efficient airside, which is this very simple U shape, and then created the spaces that go inside for the passengers to experience. So you've got planes and you've got passengers. And then we said we need to right-size them because it was actually too big. And we created spaces that could create a garden. And our client was luckily a very visionary person who said, Bangalore was historically the garden city of India, and so the theme of this project should not only be about sustainability, but the legacy of Bangalore. So this is a sort of 3D plan. We pulled apart all the passenger processing from the gates, and that's almost a 90-meter span. And passengers will walk between those 2 spaces in open-air bridges. I'll show you in a moment. And so this is what our vision of it looks like. I have some photographs that you will see that everything grows in Bangalore. It's pretty amazing. One of the other things that's really interesting about community in this project is that in India, you cannot enter the terminal without a ticket. You can't even go in the front door. You can't go in the bag claim hall. You have to stay outside. And so all the well-wishers and people who drop people off use plazas like this, and there's food and beverage, there's activity, and the airport authority was very proactive with Terminal 1's plaza, and so we had the opportunity when we did the multimodal center to make the whole top to be planned to be an outdoor plaza with food and beverage and other things, and it's when I was there recently, its construction is almost complete. As you come to the front door of the building, you're really immersed in the landscape of this project. And you think about everything from the environment from the beginning. And we'll talk more about materials and the place in a moment. But as you cross to go in the front door, this is what you see. We brought all of the materials from the exterior of the building with a very large covering so that in the monsoon rains, people are protected. And we have hanging plants, particularly in this area, so that they don't obstruct any signage. Wayfinding is super important at airports. We have a lot of modern innovations in the airport. I'll talk about 1 or 2 when we get to the end, but we've gone to the most modern, flexible bag claim and bag induction systems so that we can grow with the airport's needs. But throughout the building, you see that the column cladding and all of the ceilings is engineered bamboo. It is actually real bamboo, but it is engineered to be fire protected and Class A flame proof. Behind it, there are steel columns. It is a steel structure. It is a very simple structure and very modular. There's very curated gardens. This is the walkway between check-in and security. And There's very carefully placed skylights, and we have almost no grow lights in the whole building. The whole building is able to naturally handle all of the plants, and they electronically monitor the watering systems, which is pretty amazing. This is the view once you're in the retail space. We were able to carve multi-level spaces and work to even have water features and waterfalls in the building. This is a space at one of the waterfalls as you come through security. And you know how stressful airports can be. So our goal was not only to create a sustainable and building that people could maintain, but a place where passengers could really feel a different kind of experience than any other airport. The space that is outside, which I talked about earlier, is that 90 meters. Has actually been planted like this. We even designed some follies, which are going to have a small art museum and a restaurant. There's 2 of them that have been built. And there's actually a walkway system that wraps around inside. These are the standard sort of areas of the building where we had to think about resiliency and sustainability and really durable materials. At the same time, they have to maintain all these things. And as I said, there'll ultimately be 45 million people coming through this building every year. These are the sort of hold rooms. We had a lot of community involvement from a standpoint of the people who built everything. All of the light fixtures are made from local rattan shops, and all of these features are made out of rattan, and they're all done by local people. All the materials are local. The stone is all local from India. Mostly from the local region. There were a few portions of stone which was further out, but also still in India. And even the curtain wall is all Indian. The engineered bamboo, the bamboo itself is from China, admittedly. So you can see that the hold rooms are very unique. The light fixtures really create the ambiance along with all the materials and planting. There's a series of spaces for retail and environmental places where people can enjoy themselves. And we used a lot of other natural materials that were unusual for airports. There's on arrivals, a serpentine wall made out of brick that is all also locally sourced and locally manufactured. So we really tried to think about how we could do these things. We worked with these rattan providers and made a lot of mock-ups. We had a 3/4 scale mock-up of one entire bay before we opened and went into construction. Just some of the details of the plants, and this is what the outdoor space looks like today. In only about 3 or 4 years, there's 12 nursery buildings that are on the other side of the site, which they constantly use to bring more plants to the facility. So, the last thing I'd say about innovation, because I don't want to talk too much longer, is these are the plans of phase 1, is that it was interesting that we were opening right around the end of COVID. They were doing construction right through COVID. We started construction in 2019, but they have implemented in India Didiatra, which is a serial code for every single person. It's like your employee number in a way. I think it's your social security number, but probably I don't know for sure what it really is. Maybe it's your bank number. But anyway, everything is automated. They've been very advanced in terms of equipment. We integrated all that equipment from an electrical and data standpoint from the start of the design. On the arrivals, you walk through these corridors and you can see all of the planting. And on arrivals, all of the immigration and customs is at the forefront of facial recognition and all the different technologies that our airports are using today. So in closing, that's the environment we've created. It's working well for the community, for the people, for the artisans, and for the traveling public. And I'll turn it over to you, Jay.
That was remarkable. I really enjoyed seeing that. I'm going to show you something completely different, something obviously not of that scale. I'm Jay Velgore. I'm the founder of Studio V Architecture. I'm partners in Studio V Design and Planning, and we're working on this project, which is called Brooklyn Yards. This project is really strange and it has a long history. There was someone who lived in the neighborhood and he said, we need more housing in our neighborhood. And there's a series of cuts that go right through the middle of the neighborhood, rail cuts, that from the old Bay Ridge line, a rail line. Now this rail line is very well known today, and even it was just announced in the last week as it's advancing, because this is the rail line that will sponsor the future IBX, or Interborough Express, which is a major infrastructure project that is planned to connect Brooklyn and Queens and create a whole series of train stations, plus probably about 75,000 new units of housing as it creates new transit opportunities to really link together our outer boroughs. But when we started the project, it was really an individual in the neighborhood who had lived there for years who said, I need more housing. And he purchased the air rights over the rail line, which had been sold previously from Conrail, and came up with the idea that he wanted to build housing on it. A very unusual entrepreneur who we had worked with on some other projects. So this is the entire Bay Ridge line. And the first thing we had to do was research it and find out what is this place. And this was before the IBX even started, because we took a 10-year journey to approve this project. And I'll fast forward and go to the punchline a little bit. We are just now beginning the actual design of the 15 buildings I'll show you in a moment that are going to cover it. And so here you can see there were a whole series of tracks. Our project area is over there on the left. And as we zoom in on it, you know, there were some key facts, but it was originally designed for freight. Today, it's still used for freight. A single freight train passes every day through this, and it actually still goes across the New York Harbor on a ferry, where it is connected actually into the train line, just as all the trains in New York City originally used to do. And that's where it actually comes in all the way on the left, where it says Bay Ridge, and then it goes all the way up into Queens. So we found this whole analysis. By the way, there's a whole series of sort of like, it's remarkable, like train buffs and train geeks that have actually put all the information online. When we first researched this, we coordinated directly with the MTA, and the MTA had none of this information, even as they were working on it. They actually used us as a resource. We had some amazing young architectural researchers who actually worked with us and uncovered all the original information. For example, our project site was at one of the narrowest points on the line, where there were originally only 2 tracks. As a matter of fact, a key point we'll get into in a moment for the IBX is that actually they need 4 tracks because they're adding passenger service and freight service. And so our site actually became the test case because it's actually one of the narrowest and most constrained points along the line. So these are the sites. This is in Borough Park, Brooklyn. And you can see there these very odd, complex, gerrymandered sites that kind of pass through the middle of blocks that violate every zoning rule. And so we had to work to figure out how could we reasonably put buildings on these, and how could we do that in such a way that it would accommodate the future IBX line that they haven't designed yet. And so as we worked, this was part of the process. So the first thing we had to do was get really good surveys, and it was really challenging to get really good surveys. And by the way, just to add one other wrinkle to it, through the middle of this is one more part, maybe this relates to Laura's presentation. There's a pipeline that runs through it that many people don't know exists in New York City called the Buckeye Pipeline that carries all the jet fuel to all of JFK Airport, and it comes all the way from Texas. And it goes right down the middle, or kind of down the middle of the railway track. And as a matter of fact, no one really knows exactly where it is. When we did the survey, we actually located it for some of the first time. Even the people in the Buckeye Pipeline don't know exactly where it is under there. So these were the drawings and the diagrams we had to do. And we had to also look at the bridge capacities and how it transforms and works under a whole series of existing DOT bridges. There was precedent. We found out somebody else had built over it in Flatbush Avenue. This is the site of the Target. There's a Target store. And so there was precedent where they had built over it, and also a couple of housing projects. So being the intrepid architects we are, we actually somehow, with our little firm, you know, with 24 people, we got all the dynamic envelope loading criteria actually from the MTA and the LIRR. We also worked with Arup Engineering. They were really terrific. We brought them in early. We created a series of parametric models that showed all the different conditions along, and this was the single freight line that exists within it with the very different conditions. And we started to look at rail overbuilds and platforms and different ways of doing it economically. It's very interesting. When we started it, we originally started with 20-story buildings. We found that it was actually most economical to mostly do 4- and 5-story buildings, which would actually yield a higher return and be less expensive to build. So we ended up coming up with an overall landscape. We actually worked with Ken Smith. We created a series of green areas and passages that connect together the different blocks. And we came up with 15 buildings The majority of them are walk-ups, which actually fit into the scale of the neighborhood, which was the most economic way to build a lighter platform and to do the walk-ups, which only require, they don't require an elevator. They only require a single fire stair. And so working within the code, it was actually the most economical model. Plus we did 3 apartment buildings. Those were 6 stories, and they do have elevators and are fully accessible, plus 1 small office building. We came up with a kind of a zone strategy, a go and no-go strategy, where we could figure out how the columns could work to accommodate the future line. And then we developed this kind of isometric that showed how we would drop a series of columns, how we would do platforms, how we could create the buildings up above, how we could incorporate that in the latest studies with crash walls and all the different elements and the structure, which has now advanced to the point where we've received the approval. We now have the ability to build 15 buildings on top of this. These are the preliminary renderings where you can see the scale of it actually fits in very well with the neighborhood. 1 slightly taller building over directly by the subway station on the left. The rest of them mostly 4-story walk-ups, 4.5-story with a mezzanine, plus 6-story apartment buildings. And we really wanted to create something that kind of fit into the grain of the neighborhood, that would be organic, that would create a model for future housing. And we created a series of openings through the buildings that would actually give access to this kind of green passage along the edges of it. And we created public spaces and playgrounds and openings through them. And then along the front, where they front onto the streets, we took those streets that just had a cut there originally, and we kind of healed the neighborhood with these simple walk-up structures, kind of modern interpretations of classic Brooklyn walk-up townhomes with stoop gardens and variation in materials and colors. Here's a view from the backside built over the railway. So just creating very simple contemporary interpretations, because we're very interested in contemporary architecture, but that would really link together and heal the gap in this neighborhood and create a model for housing. And the MTA was very excited. They worked closely with us because they were interested in a proof of concept that one could build over these structures. So that's my presentation for you today, but I show you just one other thing because they asked. A different version, I call this over and under, is now we're taking highway ramps and we're actually building public parks underneath them. And this is in Long Island City. It's kind of the opposite of the first project. So I just give you a preview of this because this just began construction last week. So we'll submit that for the next one. And now I'm going to bring it back to Margaret.
Are these on? Oh, yes, they are. Okay, well, this is really challenging in terms of talking. The projects are so very different, and I think reflects the possible range. I don't think it's not obviously the full range, but of you know when we talk about transportation and infrastructure, we're talking about everything. You managed to do it with buildings, but I'd like to maybe go back to something you and I were talking about. It's how did you develop an interest in, this is not the sort of traditional architectural practice, either one of these projects, and I think they're not conventional building types. They're both in a way about journeys, and they're both places that I personally would like to be. So maybe you could talk about a little bit about how you got to that interest, how you developed actually the skill to put together those kinds of what I would say are non-traditional architectural thinking for the project.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. Great. I would say that for myself, it was very much the opportunity to do projects that are very interconnected and very interdisciplinary, to really be focused on how to integrate all kinds of technologies, engineering, architecture, and bring them all together in a public way, in a public place. I found it very exciting when I had the first opportunity to work on that kind of project. and became very excited and dedicated to completing it. My first big aviation project was a project in Toronto at the Toronto Airport Terminal 1. And I spent well over a decade working on that project, and I really learned from the ground up how to put all the pieces together. And I had worked on many kinds of projects before that. As I said, I had worked on healthcare projects, and I think hospitals are a microcosm of this. But when you work on a transportation project, it touches sort of everything from the utilities in the ground that serve the building to the roads and trains and people that come to the building. And for airports, it's an ever-changing thing as well. So, for everybody who says once you learn something, what do you need to do now? I also think that transportation and infrastructure is something that continues to evolve and change, both with technology, but also just sort of all the pieces and parts that come to us. And so it's something where there's an opportunity to keep learning all the time. And so that I found exciting, and it's been great to bring more and more team members and work with many specialties in engineering.
I mean, I would go back to what you were inspired by Saarinen, and it was Saarinen who said, you can't design a great building unless you know what a great city should be. You can't design a great room unless you know what a great chair is. So I think that as architects, we aspire to know what a great city is. And so being able to move in scales was always inspirational for me, where I think it makes us much better architects when we actually deal with projects of the scale of networks and infrastructure. And I think more and more, to Margaret's point earlier when she referenced that thing about like edges and gaps, like for us in our practice, that's a huge thing, is finding those edges and gaps and kind of healing them. And it's funny, we don't choose the sites as architects, we'd like to, but I think sometimes the sites choose us. And I think sometimes that offers opportunities to really investigate how we can take those places in our cities and bring them back and reconnect them.
So you don't think it's possible to sort of chart a deliberate path? I'm thinking of, we don't have, a few younger architects, to kind of go from a more traditional building training that we all went through in architecture school. I don't remember anybody doing train stations, but maybe some airports. Airports would probably be a little out of, but is there advice you can give to, someone aspiring to get into this exciting world of transportation projects?
I mean, I'm terribly optimistic. I think that for young people, you should pursue the things you love and you should pursue the things you like. And I went into infrastructure projects because I felt like it would open up more opportunities for my practice. So it seems like you have kind of an inspirational story too, because I'm amazed at the scale of the stuff you guys are doing,
Yeah, I mean, I think that, pursuing anything that you're interested in should be sort of your vision. And so thinking that you may need to say, design the standard, commercial building. I used to say, working at a firm that does a lot of commercial tall buildings, I used to say, I do everything but that. And that, things like airports are like skyscrapers lying on their sides. But, the other thing that we were talking about that is one of the themes is the connectivity and the importance of civic architecture to the cities and places that we go. Whether they're the gateways or whether they're the home places, and we're doing, transit-oriented development where we're enhancing the opportunity for people. Having public transit is one, and good infrastructure is one of the things that is going to continue to enable us to be sustainable. Getting rid of highways, maybe.
Something I saw in your project too, like these are the social spaces now of the city. Airports and train stations, these are incredibly social spaces. And even when we're doing housing, as you said, we're creating like linear parks and connections between them. So I think that these kind of infrastructure projects really also offer us places to find those places of public engagement and the social spaces where people are interacting. And I think that's among the greatest things architects get to work on.
I think that's a great point about the social space. I'm going to ask something which I was looking at all of the engineered bamboo and thinking, would we ever be able to do that in any project in the U.S.? And I will ask this a different way, which is I'm currently reading Ezra Klein's book, Abundance. Those of you that have read it will know what I'm talking about, but he makes the point that the environmental review processes that we put in place in the United States make it very, very difficult, increasingly difficult, to build anything of large scale. Someone's always opposed the whole NEPA process, the environmental process, which typically impacts these very large projects, are so strenuous that we sort of reach a point where it's just, we're paralyzed. So I'm curious to hear about the process of your project in India, what building is like there, and how, materials, which I would be surprised to see in an airport in the United States, and then also yours, which is we're looking for more housing all the time, but no one wants the housing in their neighborhood because they don't want their neighborhoods to change. And so this process of sort of densifying or building with unusual materials are both part of that same review process. I'm wondering if you could talk about each of you from a different perspective.
Yeah, one thing that I would say is interesting, while we were working on the Bengaluru project, sort of toward the construction document phase, we started working on a new terminal building at Kansas City Airport. So, it was interesting for our team to be working on a domestic project and this international project at the same time. One thing I would say, which I'm sorry to say it doesn't relate to what you're saying, but it came to me and I want to say it now. Visionary clients are very valuable. Yeah, sure. We can probably come back to that. But clients who really believe in the projects that you are doing with them and are part of your team are a huge value in these big projects because they do take a long time and they're of scale. I think that one of the things we found fascinating working in India during a period, even prior to this project, where construction is way behind. It's China 40 years ago or 30 years ago for those who've worked there. And we really found that enhancements in materials and construction methodology was an important thing for us. But at the same time, our clients and the airport authorities, they were looking for almost the same level of risk adverse, fire protection, security, fire alarms, everything. An ironic thing that the client asked us to do is to not have a single down leader for the drainage of the roof inside the building. So we had to design all the slopes for that massive building to take the down pipes to the outside, because they said, what if they leak? And we said, you can build them without them leaking. And they said, well, we're worried. So like with the engineered bamboo, we went through a tremendous amount of testing and research to make sure that it works. And similarly at Kansas City at the same time, we have a wood ceiling that's inside and we wanted to take it outside. And at the end of the day, with a tremendous amount of work, we found only a few types of wood that are able to be impregnated adequately to be fully flame spread. We had to bring sprinklers out under the canopy, the same as we did in India. And so I would say thinking globally and bringing the research, be it finding all of the things through surveys or having to research new materials, is part of the interesting thing about working, I think, around the world.
Well, and coming back to the issue of the challenges of doing things, I'll say something a little bit funny about my practice. As I showed you, it was almost an impossible problem. I mean, for us, or at least we thought it was impossible, and we didn't really accept that. And again, we're a smaller firm, a couple dozen people, but I believe in the agency of architects through our education, where we're taught how to research things and analyze things and come up with solutions. And so for us, I tried to give you a glimpse of that because it was a 10-year process to get that approved. In some ways, I like to say my practice makes no sense. In other words, how could we possibly do a rail overbuild? Who are we to do that? We're a few dozen people. But I think with our background in education and training, which I think is very unique among professions, it actually positions us to grasp that and to seize that and to use those skills and to deploy them and to not be afraid. So sometimes I say, as we go through this process, part of the reason I think our firm gets hired, Studio V, is because we use design sometimes to build consensus. I say something funny, I'll say it within this group. We use design to confuse people and get them to agree. We take large different constituencies. We take the MTA engineers who are a close partner with us. We take the developer who has a series of interests. We take the neighborhood and community groups that's had to go through an entire ULURP rezoning approval process. Building a rail platform is by its very nature a ULURP approval. And we had to work with council members who changed over the course of it. So we dealt with all of these different, very complex constituencies. And we used the power of design to sufficiently confuse them. They would all reach consensus when they actually all had different points of view. And we got them all to agree to it and to go forward with the plan. And I think in the most optimistic way, that's something that we can do as architects. And actually, sometimes it's most satisfying to do that at the scale of large infrastructure projects that really do transform communities.
I think it's a great point about, and I think everyone in the room who's trained as an architect or within the related professions, we're extremely well educated. I think well prepared. I mean, the education sort of proceeds during the course of the career. I'm wondering how. One of the things that I struggle with, and I have a lot of younger professionals that are part of my team and that I mentor, and sort of encouraging them to go into this profession, should I encourage them to go. So these projects that you're both working on have a very long timeline, and therefore you have to think about how you're going to be paid for the length of time, and that your expertise and your contribution to incredibly expensive projects is valued. So how do you go about looking at that, thinking about something that is going to be 10 years, 15 years, you have a baby and it's in almost in college, so it's like it's a lifetime, right? So how do you do that?
Carefully. Yeah, we have found that to be complex. I mean, I think that, most with the airports, I would say, there's this balancing act of bringing together also very, very large teams. And, with due respect, if there's an engineer in the room, I think architects are much better both educated and prepared as leaders and problem solvers with a diverse view of things to lead projects that have a lot of engineering and a lot of engineers to collaborate with. So what I have found, it's particularly interesting on the international projects because often our clients say, well, what is the dollar per square foot that you charge to build this building? And I say, we can't do it by square feet. We do it from the bottom up by how much time and energy and people it's going to take, and many, many specialists and many, many things. So, I think it is the art of building a fee and building a team and thinking through as much as possible what you think you will need and then documenting it, so that when your client asks you to do 5 other things that weren't what you thought it was, you at least can explain to them that they probably didn't pay you yet for that. It's a balancing act. They're not all easy. And I think to something you were starting to say about your teams, I think one of the other things that's great is that many, many people, not everyone, but many, many people working on our teams within the office, if you ask them, they'd say, I want to build the next airport or the next train station, because they become a fan of the building type and really engaged in the kind of work we're doing. And so that's a great joy, and they bring more people along with them. But yes, building fees is difficult.
I'll just give you a short answer. We do it one step at a time, because that's the only way we can. In other words, we often, one study leads to the next, and then you have to show where you're delivering value every step of the way. So a huge project like this almost always starts for us with a small study where we prove our merits and our ideas. And then in fact, it leads to larger and larger segments. But the second part, and maybe a different way of looking at it, with a small practice like mine, is we balance the really big projects with the small projects. And that actually helps the practice, and that helps the architects too, and it helps teach them. So in other words, we very often have very large multi-year rezoning and master planning and infrastructure projects on the boards at all times. And then we have individual buildings, and we don't hire different people for that. We have the exact same architects, and they're working on a building, and they're working on a large master plan or piece of infrastructure, and they go back and forth. And that works very well from an efficiency point of view, and it helps from a stability point of view, and it helps the practice, and I think it helps teach people, and it makes it more interesting.
Well, Laura, I think your point, which I wholeheartedly agree, is about architects being great managers of very diverse quantities and kinds of information, and the ability to manage engineers. Again, apologies to engineers. I think, and I've spent the last 10 years in an architecture engineering firms of various types, so I get that. But I think, I think I guess what I would wish for architects within this realm is that they are able to kind of demonstrate their value in terms of, financially, because I think one of the things that is the most challenging with these infrastructure with transportation infrastructure projects, they are huge in terms of their dollar value, the difficulty to build, and I don't think that architects are necessarily recognized. They just, want to, can you make it pretty? Can you make it appealing? Can you make it, and there's so much more to it than that, I think. So I think that's important. We can all kind of pitch our case there. So a sort of, I won't say the converse, but so after it's built, after this very long time, there's both ongoing maintenance, and then there is sort of post-occupancy, how the thing works. How often do you get involved in either one of those things, in sort of defining a kind of maintenance, a manual, then doing post-occupancy to say, well, this worked, this didn't, often clients don't pay for that, they want it, it's nice if you can do it.
Yeah, I would say that the post-occupancy is a little more limited. I think the first year or so, we often have engagement and are asked to come back. But I'll step back just for a minute. First, about maintenance and other things. One thing I learned starting at that Toronto project, at the airport, there are many stakeholders. The stakeholder is the community. And the stakeholders, they're the obvious ones, like airlines, and then people like the TSA and security folks. But then there's the operational people who really run the building. And, everything from, can one person get on a lift and change a light bulb, a lamp, to making sure there's no fixtures over escalators so that you can safely change those lamps. Are things that we have often been asked. I mean, for many of our projects, and starting at Toronto Pearson, they said, we need to buy new equipment to maintain this building. We're going to need a bigger scissor lift. We don't have one. And by the way, we need to move it through the building. Can you tell us what is the pathway and what kind of equipment do we need? And ultimately, we created a little maintenance booklet, not the literal how to maintain it once you get there. The electrician should know, but the physical nature of things. We have glass portions of the floor that are glass. Can we drive a vehicle on them? Yes. We had to structure them for a vehicle to drive on them. And so I think planning large-scale maintenance, and also now with technology, preparing our documents so that they can easily overlay a maintenance system and find things in a 4 million square foot building is important, all the way to these massive parking garages, signage to find your car in a 10,000 car parking garage, but maintaining those things. So we have been involved. I think the other thing that I have learned is that working for, be it a city authority or a design builder even, and I know you were thinking about whether that's a change, we can talk about that, but good relationships and strong working engagement with the clients and the people who are going to use and maintain the building has been a huge value, because they are the people who call us afterwards. And so it's true that we haven't had as much of the sort of post-occupancy direct engagement, but we do try to maintain those relationships and be able to call a client and say, we're building another glass floor. You've had yours for 10 years. Can you tell my current client whether it broke, whether you drove your equipment over it successfully? You know, we're dealing with these things because the projects are big and take a long time. Sorry if that was a bit of a twisted answer.
No, that's a scary phone call to make, because they could say, excuse me, it's not working very well.
You have to be careful who you ask them to call.
Yeah, right. And have you, I know occasionally we talk about, and as part of various proposals, projects, digital twins for planning big parts of cities. I mean, some of these airports are the size of a city. Do you do that ever? Do you use that as a...
We have not yet really done a full digital twin for any of our airport projects, but what we have done for most of them, is an integrated program for all of the equipment, and it's I'll relate it to any other building, like the fire alarm system. You have to know where the alarm is ringing so that the person can quickly get there, but it's all the maintenance equipment and everything. So I think it's not the twin, but it's the base building. So, I mean, normally we take all our models now and they load them directly into their maintenance systems like Massimo, and there's others. There's multiple systems on the market. But it's something that we have on most of our projects, particularly, U.S. projects where we're working all the way through construction, worked with the client's maintenance and operations team to set up those models. But we have not done a digital twin yet.
I mean, you could add one thing, that there is the digital twin at the larger scale, the master plan of the city, where it's being used as a tool, and we're starting to experiment with those, which is very interesting. But in a sense, as architects, we're kind of all building digital twins. It's called a Revit model. And for those of us working in Revit, and even on all different projects, and once you go to LOD 600, or if you get into more advanced levels of Revit, it actually becomes an ongoing model for the tool for the maintenance and manipulation and change and renovation of the building itself. So I think we're moving into the realm in a way, all of us, even as architects, those of us using Revit, and many people are now moving into that. And I'm finding it helpful as a design tool. That's why I actually love Revit. It's great as a design tool to cut a section through anything and see where you are and what's really going on is the best. But I actually think that's a tool for us to engage into the future of post-occupancy of buildings, is how we use Revit as a tool going forward and prepare models and hand them over and even get engaged with them later.
Have you called any of your past clients?
I do, and they call us. We do call past clients, but you're right, we don't do enough post-occupancy work in our profession. And as we do larger work and more institutional work, clearly that's more and more part of it.
Yeah. Laura, you mentioned this, and this was something on my mind when we were talking, that because we've seen a lot of these very large projects go to design build as opposed to design bid build. Have you found that to be true in these kinds of projects that you're working on, and how's that obviously changes the nature of your practice?
Yes, we certainly have. I think that it's a very interesting dynamic to work through design build projects. We've done both design build and triple P, which, meaning that there's a developer involved as well as a builder and then the client. And I think that communication and building relationships is sort of, you have to get on board, but you have to get them on board. So to your point about, I think maybe in this case, maybe not confusing them, but making sure it's all clear, making sure we think through costs and constructability early, so that we don't get caught with having to back our way into GMPs that people have committed to, are really important factors. Yes, Kansas City was a design build. Our Seattle International Arrivals facility was design build. We've done a few of them. I think they're better. It's working better for us and for the builders and for the owners to be progressive, as opposed to trying to have a GMP the day you start, because you never know what it is. It'll be wrong no matter what. I think, unfortunately, people imagine lower budgets than they can really achieve. And our international projects, particularly the ones in India, the two large infrastructure projects, and I think this is true in many countries where I've spoken to people in South America and other places, the similar model to the public-private partnership is happening, where, for instance, in India, the government just said, well, we have 100, however many, tons of airports. We are not going to modernize them all by ourselves. So they privatized all the airports, and they started with the largest ones. And the idea was that a developer would build the airport, and they would get a 100-year lease for land around them, and they could build developments to make money to pay for the fact that they develop these large and operate these large airports. And so there's a number of developers that have taken this up. And so I think it is very interesting and challenging. They call it engineer, procure, construct, as opposed to design build, but it's sort of similar. And so we have seen it changing the market, but very much need to think about it from the start. I think, really understand your client, who the chain of communication is with.
Even our small practice, so I have my partner Kathy, and she couldn't be here tonight, but she's doing projects. We're renovating subway stations in New York, and it's very straightforward work, and it's all design build. We're doing that with Parsons, so Parsons is the design build partner, and we're working with them, and we're renovating, train stations throughout New York City. And even for a small practice, that can be a viable method, and it's very complex, and it's difficult, and there are different ways one has to work through in order to make sure it works with a practice and it makes sense. But for us, that was an interesting venue to get into doing more public work and to get a foot into that, even with 24 people.
So let's talk about community engagement. It's a part of every project, particularly these sizable ones that you're working on. Talk about housing for the project that you submitted and that is getting built. I'm sure I don't know how many communities that involved, but did you do the engagement for that? And
so it's a funny thing with our firm, but I personally do a lot of the community engagement. I mean, we work with groups of people. Our whole team works on the project, and maybe it's funny with our practice, but maybe it's part of it where I personally do a lot of the community engagement. So, because I'm interested in that, and actually we'll go out and do that. So I presented last week to a community board, and I'll be doing another one next week. And this project involved very extensive community engagement. There were two different community boards that actually overlapped because the project actually went through two different boards, and we worked with them. We worked with local elected officials, one of whom then left. Actually, he got term limited out, and then he became a client, very interestingly. Went on to run an institution and then hired us to do a building for him that we're finishing now. So I think that community engagement is really important. It's very difficult. It's very challenging. And I think a key part of it is really explaining things in a way people can understand, because by its very nature, the process can also be extremely adversarial, and that's a shame, and that's just part of it, that we deal with it. So we find that we often go in, and it's really about having the right kinds of drawings. It's about having the right way to present to people. Maybe for me, also, it's like where I grew up. I feel like I'm a Midwesterner, and I grew up in Buffalo. And sometimes when I go into these meetings, I feel like you just treat people kind of like the people I grew up with in my small town back home. And so somehow that's part of it, and that becomes part of how we actually succeed at what we do. I think community engagement's a big part of it, actually.
have you come up with ways? I'm looking at the categories around this award. Network, place, environment, innovation. Is there what are the things that we could do? Because I know community engagement it can be incredibly problematic. It can be adversarial, as you said. What are the innovation pieces of that might make it work better?
Well, I returned to that earlier theme about design. It may sound funny, but if you really create the right drawings and use design as a tool, a lot of times people fight over the wrong things. They fight over density or perceived density or parking. These are the things, traffic. It's the same set of issues, especially when we're practicing in New York City. So that's where we talk about public space, social spaces, materials, scale, greenery, incorporating, and we habitat, sustainability, resiliency. We're doing a huge amount with resiliency. Sometimes community engagement for us is even coming up with ideas that are outside of the mainstream. I'm doing a project right now going through a huge community process. It's in Gravesend. It's right next to Coney Island. A lot of people don't even know where Gravesend is, South Brooklyn. And we created a resiliency center because Coney Island is underwater in Sandy, the whole thing. So when I do an as of right building, I just finished a 28-story building there. No one questioned at all my ability to build there. It was as of right. Now I'm building on a waterfront in Gravesend, and they're saying, should you build here? So instead of just saying, I'll elevate and I'll create resilient features, I said, what if we create, the project is large enough, we'll create a resiliency center that will actually help with risk and recovery for all of Coney Island, that we won't just make our own community, our own project resilient. What if we create something that's actually going to help the rest of the community? Because all the police stations and hospitals and schools in Coney Island are underwater and nobody has a plan. So going back to public-private partnerships, I'm doing that for a private developer. And I went to him and I said, I think you need to spend this much money and create this. And actually that's going to help everybody else. And we're going to take that into the public approval process. So sometimes, again, I believe in the agency of the architect. These are not simple things. I'm not trying to present them as simple. That project has been going on. It'll be approved this year. That one's been going on for 10 years. But I think creative thinking and creative approaches that we were trained with and learned with can offer us the possibilities to find new ways to go forward. So it's not just about convincing people, but it's coming up with ideas that will actually help people and make it better. And it's not always perfect. It won't work every time, but remarkably, that can work a lot of the time, and it's worked for us.
Did you have to do any engagement to build the terminal that we looked at, the airport?
Yeah, we did a limited amount of community engagement, but the client did quite a bit of community engagement prior to or during the period when they hired us, because they were doing a tremendous amount of land movement. They also built an entirely new runway because of the capacity needed. And so, there's, two sides of community engagement for projects like the airports or the rail projects. One, and I think they would be similar, one is about what does the community need? How do they react? In Kansas City, we ran the whole community engagement program because that project was very unique. It had to get approved by the city authorities. And so we had 13 different community boards to meet with to get. And you could only vote if you lived on the Missouri side of Kansas City. You couldn't vote from the Kansas City side because that wasn't who was built, it's crazy. But the other interesting thing in many of these projects, which I'm sure you run into, is how do you manage community expectation during construction and implementation? And so for the Bangalore project, it was much more about the disruption, that there was a major road being built, there's a metro line that is going to connect into the airport. And so a lot of it was about the approach to helping our client in a way publicize that they were going to manage the community impacts. And bringing that to the community, and then helping come up with ideas of how to support projects of community good so that the community benefited as well. How everything from job training to engagement with more artisans and community fellows. So it's varied for us on different projects. But for us, for sure, even if you don't have a lot of community engagement, you have a lot of engagement of you're going to be under construction for 5 or 7 years. And what does that mean to the traveling public who's still got to use that building? Because almost all the projects we've ever worked on are, I would call brownfield. They're existing, they're getting a new terminal, but it's impacting everything that's happening there. So that's one of the biggest things I think that we all deal with on these large infrastructure projects.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up. Are we supposed to finish by 7:30? Does anybody know? When do we get kicked out of here? Yeah? Yeah. Oh, 8? Oh, okay. All right. So Aman mentioned that the AIA New York is working with a number of other cities or states in terms of supporting this transportation infrastructure. Not that many, given that there's 50 states, but so why? How do we promote this in terms of why is it important? I mean, I think we've talked about all the things that interest us and why we think it's important to the community, but why should this be a national category?
Because every one of those communities needs these projects, and so they should all be thinking about internally as architects and engineers, raising the quality of the projects, and as we drive for design excellence and thinking about how we deliver projects like this to our communities, we should then share amongst the professional community and consider whether they're, whether it's awards or just a program to bring them all forward so everybody sees each other's work and can help build upon that. For a community to say, I don't need this, but what are you doing with your infrastructure projects? So it seems like raising the awareness and the bar for the quality of infrastructure and transportation projects merits architects thinking about submitting themselves and saying, I've done something great, and sharing their work.
I mean, my short answer would be, how can you most positively affect the greatest number of people? And there are many things we can do, but infrastructure, transportation, mobility, it affects where people live, it affects how they see their families, it affects their jobs, it affects their economic opportunity. And so I think these are projects that, as architects, if we really want to make a difference, and as we said, they're social spaces, they're really important places of connection. So I think that maybe that's a reason why we should really emphasize these things. That would be my answer.
All right, I will open it up to questions, and I think we may have some people online as well. So yeah, Jim.
Actually, I wanted to just follow up on that question. I think there's lots of awards programs, and I've started noticing the reason why this was created was because transportation infrastructure traditionally didn't show up in the major awards, design awards. We're starting to see more of the infrastructure showing up in the major awards and programs, and something I've been thinking about is how would a program like this that's focused specifically on transportation and infrastructure sort of compete, but also have a unique sort of niche that talks about that in a way that might be different from the larger programs. So it's kind of I'm curious to hear your points of view, and I think it's also feedback that would be useful for the committee.
I'm sure I know the answer.
Well, how do you decide where to submit a project? You have a lot of choices.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and I think we tried to think about how, because you can't submit everything for every award. So you try to think about where, for us, where we have projects that we think hit the mark, so to speak. And, so we've been very excited by the opportunity because many of the award programs don't have opportunities for us to submit things like an airport terminal. So for us, it's almost like we look at not every project is a gem. We would love to think, I mean, they're all gems to do, but, the end product isn't always. But we think that we find our greatest projects and then try to find the right places to submit them. And so I think for us, where we have a chunk of our practice in transportation and infrastructure, we think it's a great opportunity. And, it's sort of like going to a completely slightly off subject, but, when we first were applying for LEED, it's very hard for an airport to apply for LEED because there are things that are just you can't do, like the spread of light. Well, you need lights on as long as a plane is going to land. There's things that are just complicated. And so I think having a program like this has a great opportunity for those of us working on this type of project to submit. I don't know if that really answers your question, but yeah.
I think that the network, the use of the term network as one of the criteria is you don't typically apply that, I don't think, to single buildings. I mean, you can have maybe a campus, but it's not a campus, but transportation is, in all its many forms, is always part of a network. I think that defines it. So, and an airport is part of that sort of larger network. And you mentioned the Buckeye Pipeline. I never heard of that. I can't believe I've not heard.
A lot of people don't even know what happens in our transportation infrastructure. It's crazy, the stuff you find.
Think anyone will ever submit a nice pipeline? Anyway, for an award. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. It was a really interesting presentation. I'm a recent grad and I have a question regarding each project. So you mentioned the Garden City, and I was wondering kind of what were some of the biodiversity considerations and ecological impacts, or maybe, using native plants within that project. And then regarding your projects, I was just wondering, how do you go about, do you purchase the air rights above the train line, or how does that work? And when those units then get sold, if there's ever any maintenance needed on that slab that is above, who pays for that? Who owns that? I was just confused about that.
You're going to start with that?
Thank you.
So the air rights are very simple. That's just a kind of a legal mechanism. Technically, it's called a fee above a plane. And actually, the client had already purchased them, and they already existed. And surprisingly, these things kind of exist all over the city in different ways. So that's just a simple vehicle, and he actually owns that land above it, and the railway has the right to put the railway underneath. And legally, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's kind of the basis of it. Relative to the platform, the people building the building would be responsible for the platform. And when you really look at a city like New York City, you'd be amazed. There are buildings built on platforms and over things and under things all over the city. And so there are all kinds of easements and rules, and it's not just rail over bills, although that's certainly a more exotic version of it, but these things exist all over, including that last project I just showed you where they did the opposite. They sold the air rights under the highway and made that into a public park for the community and transferred those so a developer could build a taller building and then paid all the money for the construction of the park and the maintenance of the park for decades to come. So there are a lot of different deals like that, and I think that they have to be done carefully and thoughtfully, but they offer huge opportunities, especially in a vertical city like ours.
We had not only a landscape architect, but there was horticulturists on board throughout the process, and all the plantings that are outside the building are generally native to the area. The other thing that we had to deal with is that, this is going to sound a little funny, but birds are not things you want at airports. And so we had to be very thoughtful and careful about the types of plantings so that they don't have berries that birds want to eat, and that they also don't have a lot of bugs that want to live in them, because birds want to eat those too. We definitely were focused on that outside, but on the inside of the building, we had a lot of opportunity to, and a client who was very committed. We have, a 400-year-old olive tree that they brought from Italy, that we have amazing diversity because we have multiple gardens inside the building. But it definitely takes a lot of coordination and maintenance. Yeah, I unfortunately am not the horticulturist, so I can't give you more details, but.
Thank you.
You should take a look at Hudson Yards, the ultimate overbuild. If you, yeah, as a sort of case study, it's a yes, yep, yep. In terms of how it was structured, and it was, if you're not familiar, it's worth a look. Yeah. Other questions?
Hi, Michelle. Thank you very much. It was, first of all, great having such different projects side by side and sort of certain common themes that have come up. One question I have a little bit more towards the Bangalore, the airport, is I'm on a committee that we're dealing with how you maintain quality design in different delivery methods. So my question is, what kind of delivery method was it? I thought I heard you say 70% drawing, so that's one of the questions. But then also you really were able to maintain a very high level of quality, and just how did you manage that?
So yeah, I'll start by answering the drawing question. It's it's a little funny. We never know in which country we're working exactly which standards. They sort of were partly REBA, partly US standards because of the people who helped write the original RFP. So we did detailed design, and so most of the building was drawn to about 70% construction documents. It was all modeled in Revit. There were some interior things that were a little looser because they wanted, like for instance, in the bathrooms, they wanted these art pieces, so we had some empty places for the artists to come. But we wrote all the specifications as well. And we had to work with a local architecture firm to help us, because in some cases, like the quality of brick was a big deal, because you can't get like good wire cut brick very easily there. I mean, we went through like a dozen brick manufacturers until they finally realized that we wanted bricks that were dimensional, not just like handmade bricks. Like handmade bricks are cool, but not for big walls and not for structural conditions. And so what it was, this engineer, procure, construct method. And so the contractor bid on the drawings. They bid on them when we were about 50% complete. We delivered them our Revit model. They did build a whole new Revit model. And it happens that that construction company has an engineering and architecture division. They have a couple of hundred people, and they completed the drawings fully. But the client was also quite smart. It was a big investment for them, so they had a program manager who was pretty good. They had an international division of Turner Construction who helped oversee the construction. We reviewed some shop drawings. I mean, it was unfortunate that we were sort of COVID. We couldn't make as many site visits. We did at the very beginning. And one of the things we did was we had one or two of our team members. The first year and a half we were able to do this because it was pre-COVID. Would go there for 3 weeks at a time, and then come back for 3 or 4 weeks, and then go there for 3 or 4 weeks at a time, and was really part of reviewing the documents they were putting together, reviewing material samples, going to the shops to check on things like the slabs, doing this whole brick research thing. So really just trying to, we put from the very beginning a fee. We didn't know how we would use it, but we used it to integrate people into the review process of the documents and the samples mostly.
Did that help?
Yeah, yes, it's just it's an ongoing challenge of how you maintain quality, and that it does sort of move away from you. And you also, I was intrigued because you had a lot of this raffia and handmade stuff by local artisans. And, it looks pretty fantastic.
Yeah, our client was willing to throw away the bad ones.
That sounds neat.
It's made twice as many.
I really think that, even for us to, fully achieve something like this, especially with all the plantings, they finally just said, okay, we're going to do it. And they had, I think the client had people on board, including their own horticulture team, who really were like, this is the project of a lifetime. We're going to be very invested to do it.
Well, I think you said earlier, a visionary client, we used a lot of these. A visionary client is a valuable.
Absolutely.
Are they going to build another airport?
They're going to build the other half.
Okay.
Yeah. And
It was so much fun the first.
I got one question. Was your team inspired by Ruth Asawa? Everyone's seen that great Ruth Asawa show
Yeah.
up right now, and I thought they were beautiful relative to the forms.
interesting. No, I don't know, but maybe
That's
Because
yeah.
those forms in your design with those interlocking organic shapes, the beautiful Japanese artist, Ruth Asawa, she's got the big show up at MoMA right now, they're very much interpreted and modified and changed, but as an inspiration, because I thought the forms were very beautiful, it really reminded me of that. Anyone who hasn't seen that show, like an amazing show.
Interesting. One thing that's interesting and similar, if you look up our Mumbai airport, very, very different. But one of the things that was interesting, we did in Mumbai work with some, I wouldn't call them local artists, and they actually started as clothing designers, and they now do a lot of interiors and product design. But they helped us with a couple of things. And so, for instance, some of the things that look like bells, the client, would literally say to us, there's this beautiful craft in our community in Karnataka of bells. Can you do something with that? And so we created bells of all different kinds. There are bells that are made out of LEDs and that move and are lit. And there are bells made of plants, and there are bells that are just metal. And so in many cases, they were ideas that came from local forms or culturally resonant Indian things from the crafts of the area.
Any other questions?
Nothing wasn't.
We're good. I'm going to ask one last one. So there's a lot of discussion about equity and inclusion in projects, and there are various ways that happens or doesn't happen. How do you talk about that? I mean, obviously, in a project of the scale you're working on, that has a different meaning, perhaps, than in yours. Any?
Well, I think that, we talk about it in terms of physical accessibility and support for people of every ability or lack. So, we deal with everything from, I think we could, for those of us who are aging, we can say that the aging population is traveling more than anyone because they have the wherewithal and the interest. And so, everything from thinking about not only how we enable people with hearing disabilities, people with visual disabilities, and equitable facilities for people who need anything unique. I think in Kansas City was a better example. We have everything from a sensory room for people who've never taken a flight before. We got an airline to donate the inside of a piece of a plane that was no longer, so that they could actually try it out, to spaces for people of different abilities, for children. We worked with a local community group who deals with autistic children. And we went all the way to city council to get all gender restrooms throughout the airport. So those are the kinds of things that the public, the traveling public needs, because they're not living at the airport. They're coming there, but all kinds of people are coming. We try to instill with our clients the flexibility and facilities needed that we think we can get, as many things as we can get.
And in some ways, so diversity, equity, these are still very much a part of our practice, even if they're under challenge today. And even if, we're seeing a lot of national debate over that. But from our point of view, when we're doing projects, really the main way it's reflected, there are affordable components, there is affordable housing, there is outreach that we do with the community, there is accessibility and how we deal with accessibility issues and equity that way. So there are many different ways that still affects us. And it's a key part of our practice. And I believe, notwithstanding, and again, I'm an optimist. It's a challenging time to be an optimist, but I'm an optimist and I believe that these are the issues that will unite us and carry us forward.
And I think that's a great place to close. So thank you, everyone. Can we give thanks for our panel?